One, two, three, go.
There we go.
All right. So I'm Bill Conall. I'm the current storyteller-in-residence for Cape Breton Regional Library. The program is in its 10th year now, and I'm the third storyteller. And glad to be here. And we have visitor guests here too tonight, both Stewarts. One of them is Lee Stewart from Whitney Pier, and the other one is Stuart Mcdonald, formerly from Englishtown and now banished to Digby. So there we are. I'm going to go to gallery here so I can see everybody. And we're going to just start the engine and see where it goes. And I think, Lee, Mr. Stewart, you're looking kind of calm. So why don't you kick things off here?
Okay. First off, I'll tell you a little about where I am and where I live here. I'm down here in Whitney Pier in Sydney, and the story of the pier begins back in around the 1890s. Okay, prior to 1900, most people in the pier, before it was even called the pier, it was a farming community. So then along come a guy by the name of Henry Malvin Whitney. And Henry came here to Sydney to be to run the International Pier, the International Coal Pier, which is just out my window down the street there. And he came here and he overseen the coal coming from Glace Bay by the SNRL Railroad, Sydney Louisburg Railroad, from Glace Bay to Waterford down to the international piers. So he had the idea to build a Sydney Steel. So Sydney Steel, which was built on 400 acres of property, and it was the separator that separated what we know as the pier from the former city of Sydney. It ran from the International Pier in the harbor up through the Sydney Steel Plant lands to Lingan, up to what we call the radar base, our former radar base, and then down to what we call the Dead Man's Turn, which goes into South Bar. It's a sharp turn there, and that's where you leave the pier. So it's actually in a triangle is what the property, it's 3 miles. The pier encompasses 3 miles. And when the steel plant was built, immigration was huge, right? People came from everywhere. Our ethnic groups were Ukrainians, Poles, Blacks, Scots, Acadians, Irish, Jewish, Croatians, Lebanese, Hungarians, all came to the pier to work at Sydney Steel. Now, the neighborhoods that were made up, and some people believe that the neighborhoods were segregated, but in actuality, they weren't. The segregation occurred because of the lack of housing in the beginning. So many of your Black and Italian families lived in what we call the coke ovens, which bordered the actual coke ovens, right? And then as you came up Victoria Roadway, from Henry Street to where I grew up on Fair Street and a couple of streets over, is what we called Hunky Town. And Hunky Town was where your Polish people lived, and a lot of Irish, and our side, Scottish people, right? And then from there on down to the Dead Man's Turn, it was called Dog Patch. And down the Dog Patch was once again, also mostly steel working families and people of Irish and so our community down here in Whitney Pier was quite multicultural. I couldn't tell you the number of stores and the number of shops that were along Victoria Road, with probably nobody had to leave the pier to go anywhere. As I say, we were separated. In the beginning, we were separated on the steel plant, with the steel plant property, on what they call Macquarie's Brook or Macquarie's Road. And what would happen was, if you wanted to go to town, you would get on the tram car, go to Macquarie's Road, get off the tram car, and go walk across the tracks and get on the other tram car that would take you to town. It's almost like what the separation of our new road down here, what they call the No Man's Road, where they had the big controversy over the track separating from Lingan Road to the Spar Road. It was that way back then. And so they came up with the idea in 1912 to build the subway. So the subway was built in 1912, and it alleviated the problems of people having to cross the tracks, because the trains used to go across the top of the subway. But the problem was there was no sidewalk going through the subway for anybody to walk. And it flooded quite frequently. It would flood. So they were back to using a road off of the bottom of Lingan Road, where now the Spar Road is, to get through the property to town. Then 50 years later, they decided they wanted to build what we know today as the overpass, right? So the overpass was built in 1963, and I'm coming to my story, Bill. It was built in 1963, and by the federal and provincial governments of the day, at the cost of over $1.5 million. But if you've ever gone over the overpass and you've went down in the dip and come out of the dip, that was actually done to save $500,000 at that time in 1963. That's why there's a dip in the overpass. Instead of putting the pillars in, they made the dip out of gravel and they paved it up the road and created the overpass. Being a bus driver, I've driven over the overpass so many times. Being a pier boy, I've walked across it so many times. I can tell you the number of slots you go over when you drive over it. Every one of those bumps you feel, there's 17 of them. I can almost tell you the number of sidewalks, the sidewalk pads that I walked over going to City Academy when I was a teenager. We didn't get bussed. We walked everywhere. But anyway, this is coming up to my story, and here's a little story for you. In 1963, I was 7 years old. Okay, I lived on Ferris Street with my brothers, my sisters, and my mother. And it was a kind of an apartment complex that we lived in. It was a big house with 4 apartments. My grandmother happened to live in the back apartment, and we could access my grandmother because we shared the same washroom through a door and through her door into her apartment, right? So anyway, on this particular autumn day, and it was in the autumn, I can remember, I was in visiting my nanny, and as like I did almost every morning before I went to Whitney School, which was 4 blocks away that I had to walk to school and walk home. And Nanny filled my pockets with an orange and some cookies, and off I went. So anyway, I go through the neighbor's fence, as I've always done, and I go to where the present day Tim Hortons is now. There was Trinity Church Hall. It was a big hall. My grandmother actually worked there. She baked hundreds of pies for the Wisemans over all the years that she worked there, probably thousands of pies. So anyway, I'm going across the parking lot, and a voice calls out to me, "Hey, Beaver, where you going?" And I look up, and here's a good buddy of mine by the name of Blaze Hollahan. Now, Blaze has passed away a few years back, but he was another little boy like myself. He lived 2 streets over. So I said, "I'm on my way to school." He said, "I'm not going to school today." He said, "Let's go and see them build the overpass." So, hey, why not, right? So anyway, Blaze and I walked the 10 blocks down to where they were building the overpass. And at the very end of the overpass on the right-hand side, there's a big house. And we parked ourselves under the basement window of that big house on that October morning and sat down and watched the men coming and going, the machinery coming and going. We watched them raising the pillars. I can remember it so vividly. Raising the pillars to build in the building of the overpass, right? So we sat there and we shared the cookies and what my grandmother gave me. It seemed like we were there a long time, right? Then a car pulls up, not just a taxi. Taxi pulls up and kind of blocks our sight. And this fella gets out of the cab and he comes around the cab and he looks at us and he says, "What are you two doing here?" So like, hey, we're watching them build the overpass. And then build that thing that every pier boy and pier girl hated to hear was, "What's your mother's name?" Or "What's your father's name?" Right? So right away I blurred out, "Yeah, my mother's Ira Stewart." And my buddy Blaze blurts out, "Yeah, my father's Leo Hollahan and my mother's Mary Hollahan." And the cab driver looked at us and said, "Get in the car." So you didn't say no, it was the 60s, right? So anyway, we get in the car and the next thing you know, we're outside my house. And the cab driver looks at me and says, "You come with me," to me. "You stay in the car," to Blaze. So he goes up to my mother's door and he knocks on the door. And in those days, you could walk right in the house. And he opened the door and he hollers to my mother, "Iris, Iris, I got something here that belongs to you." And my mother was somewhere in the house. And that's when I came to the realization that I was in trouble. You know, so I, in my ultimate wisdom, went into the dining room and got behind the sofa. And I went in behind the sofa and I could hear the cab driver talking to my mother and saying, "I got your beaver here. He's in the house here." And my mother said, "Oh, no, my beaver's in school." And he said, "Well, you might want to look behind the sofa." So anyway, my mother came over and she looked behind the sofa and said, "You little," and then she sent me up to my room at first, then took me from my room, took me down to the school to apologize to the teacher and apologize to the principal. Now, my buddy Blaze, I never seen him after that for at least a month. So I really can't say what became of him over that month's time. And that's my little story about the overpass. Yeah.
Good for you, Mike. Great. Look, the crowd goes wild.
Yeah, but I know you guys are great. I'm starting to think we should, yeah.
You made me think of our guest last month, Kathy, who's watching now. She's opened by saying, "Oh no, this was 2 ago. This was Nancy Smith." I said, "Well, I've only got one story," she said, and then she kept spewing them out all night long. We were an hour and a half into it. Good. Well, thank you very much. I see Tara sent a text saying if you have something or a chat, just let us know on the chat, and I will point that out again. If you'd like to contribute a story, you can just send a note to me or to Tara, and we'll certainly make room for you. And our other guest is a friend of mine from, well, farther back than Lee anyway. Stuart Mcdonald. Stuart's been he's an English towner, and he is now in Digby. Been a Canadian Forces, served his career there, and now he's active with Digby Search and Rescue. He was telling us before that they operate like the fire department. They're all volunteers, which I didn't know. Stuart, not Mr. Stewart, but Stewart.
Yeah.
How are you doing, old boy?
Oh, I'm good. Yeah. So, where to start? Well,
maybe just before you start, Stuart, I'll just say if there's people here who aren't from Cape Breton, just so you can place us geographically, Canada is a large body of land just off the west coast of Cape Breton.
That's right. I grew up in Englishtown, and when I say grew up, we were feral kids. I like the way we grew up. Kind of spent most of our time in the woods or up in Kelly's Mountain, and I used to go down to the shore a lot on the North Shore. That's where my grandparents, that's where my father's from. Joined the military. You know, did 21 years in the military, and if there's any military people that are watching, I was in the infantry for 13 years and in the RCR, and then I remustered over to signals. I got to see a lot of the world that way, and you know, on those travels, that's where I began to realize how you know, might be a biased view, but how special Cape Breton was, especially my little part of the woods, or part of the island, and how unique it was, you know. As far as stories, well, one of my jobs in the military was I was a bagpiper, and I played for quite a few of the royal family, Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, and Prince Andrew. But the one thing I'm known for was there was one concert we played for the Queen Mother, right? And I like the Queen Mother, don't get me wrong. But anyway, we were doing the Liberation of Europe celebration in Hyde Park. There was a great big stand set up in front of us, and before we went out on the field, we were told that this was just a parade practice, right? Getting ready for the actual show. So before we went out, and you know, we didn't have our top buttons done up, and some guys were wearing sunglasses and stuff. Because we thought it was going to be a practice, so we went through the motions, and for whatever reason, they stuck our pipe band on one end. Then they had the guards, like the Scots Guards and Welsh Guards or whatever, their brass band next to us, and on the other side was the rest of the pipe bands. There was the Scots Guards and the Royal Tank Regiment, four Royal Tank Regiment to the Scottish Regiment. Anyway, we couldn't hear the other pipe bands, and we were taking our, you know, there in pipe music, you get what's called a double tap from the bass drum to signal to you to shut off the bagpipes, right? The rest of the band wasn't catching the double tap, and I was catching it, so I'd signal to our bass drummer who was right behind me, you know, like give the double tap so he can shut off. So anyway, I did that. Every time I did that, there was a British soldier off to my left, and he was cursing at me, and I couldn't figure out what he was cursing. What I didn't know was the Queen Mother was up in the stands, right? That's when we realized this was a real parade. So, you know, every time we're playing a tune, I'd give the signal to the bass drummer, and this went on. And anyway, the next morning, we'll say, I got up. We were staying in an RAF camp called Northolt in the north end of London, and my friends from the Royal Tank Regiment, we had some pretty decent friends in that regiment. Anyway, they were outside underneath the shade of a tree, and they were reading a newspaper. And when I came out, they started laughing, and I couldn't figure out what they were laughing at. Well, on the front page was a picture of me doing this. And underneath it has Canadian soldier gives the Queen Mother the bird.
Oh.
But I'm not going to go through the motion what that means in Canada, but yeah, I think people can use their imagination. So that was one thing I was famous for. If it wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have any. You know, that's the kind of person I am.
Good.
So yeah. So that same day, we were to play a big concert, and I'm not exaggerating here. There were 6 million people at this concert at the Liberation celebrations. Like, you got a picture, Hyde Park was just full of people, like, you know, you'd see for the royal weddings and stuff. There were 6 million people in that park.
Wow.
And anyway, the band was going to, the Royal Tank Regiment and the Royal Canadian Regiment Pipes and Drums were going to go up and play on stage. And we were going to play with Vera Lynn. And anyway, there was a lot of celebrities there. I wasn't familiar with many of them, other than Vera Lynn. I knew who she was. And I had a canker inside the cheek. Like when you blow your pipes a lot, it's almost like you get a blister on your foot, but you get a canker on your cheek, and it really hurts. So I got permission to kind of stay off of the show, and I really wanted to play, but I couldn't. So while everybody else was getting ready to go up on stage, they were doing a little tuning circle. I was talking to some of the people in the little celebrity tent, and this fella comes up and he's got like a sequence kind of dinner jacket and a bow tie and nice collared shirt, and his hair's all kind of slicked back a bit. And we're talking, he was asking me where I was from, and I was explaining where I was from and stuff. And the boys in the two bands, they had finished tuning, and when they came in, my Scottish, and I'm going to attempt a Scottish accent here, but the Scottish guys came in and they yelled at me. They were like, "Oh, Cliff Richards," right? And I'm like, "Who?" And the guys come up, "Oh, that's Cliff Richards," and they're like, "You don't know who Cliff Richards is?" And I said, "No, sorry, I don't." And I honestly didn't. And this fella, like this Cliff Richards guy, is trying to explain who he is, and he's, you know, I don't know if he didn't know how big Canada was, but he says, like, you know, I played in Toronto. And I went, "Yeah, well," I said, "I'll take credit." He said, "That's about like 3,000 miles from where I live." So I got to meet Cliff Richards, and I did meet Vera Lynn. That was pretty neat. So anyway.
Oh, good, dear. Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah.
Goodness. This is a story I heard from my friend Hector McNeil. I guess you know Hector, Stuart, do you?
Yeah.
Anyway, which one was it? Oh, yes. He said the priest had heard that one of the couples in his congregation was having some marital difficulties, and he thought he should intervene and try and calm things down for them, you know. But he was a little anxious because the fella had quite a temper on him, and his wife was known for her sharp tongue. So he was a little anxious about this, but he wangled an invitation to dinner anyway, and he went to the house, and as soon as he opened the door, he could feel the tension in the room. He thought, "Ooh, ooh." And the wife spoke to the priest, and so did the husband. They weren't talking to each other. And they sat down to dinner, and it was just as cold as your mother-in-law's kiss. And priest is saying, "Lord, I need some help. How am I going to deal with this?" And the meal went on, and he happened to look over, and there over by the stove was a big brown dog and a little gray cat curled up sleeping together. He said, "Thank you, Lord, that's the sign I needed." And when the meal was done, he said, "Now, isn't it a wonderful thing," he said to him, "how so many creatures so different in this world get along?" He said, "Just look over there in the corner at that dog and the cat. They're animals so different, and they get along so beautifully together." And the man glowered at him, and the woman said, "Yes, Father, you're right. But tie them together and see how long that lasts." That's the end of the story. Oh dear.
Yes.
Beaver. Now, Lee told me that everyone calls him Beaver, including his mother, but if you call him Beaver in front of his mother, she's going to get cuffy on the ear.
That's
I
exactly
don't
right.
have to go into that, but just establishing the ground rules here. Got something else for us, Lee?
Well, I'd like to continue telling you a little bit more about the pier. Some notable people from the pier, and then I'll get into a little story about one of these notable people. People who grew up in the pier or who were associated with the pier in their life. Godfrey Cambridge. You know, Godfrey Cambridge, the comedian, the stand-up comedian from the 50s and 60s. Well, Godfrey Cambridge, his parents who lived in New York, sent him here to Whitney Pier to live with his grandmother because his father didn't like New York. So Godfrey came and went to school here in the pier, and over the years in his acting career and his his stand-up comedy career, he always referred to the pier and the teachers of Whitney School. Well, I'm not going to get into them, but he, yeah, because I had some of the same teachers. But there's one guy that's very notable that came to the pier. Another guy is by the name of Nathan Cohen, was a theater critic, famous theater critic in Canada. He was one of the first. Now, Bill, I don't know if you know this or not, but Sandra Dunn, you know, her daughter Carolyn Dunn was a great actress from the 70s. Well, she was a teenager in the 70s. She hung around with myself and my wife. They were good friends. And Carolyn went on to be an actress and starred in TV. Had her own TV show at one time called Tropical Heat, which was on the CBC network. And she moved back here to the pier. She's living here now. Another notable from the pier is my Aunt Frances, who was the daughter of the archpriest down here at the church. She was the 31st Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia. And she was a pier girl. Other notable politicians, Paul Mcewan, as we would call Paul, the great Paul Mcewan, who was the longest member of the Nova Scotia Parliament forever, the longest Speaker of the House. Paul was a school teacher here in Whitney Pier and then became a politician. And wherever Paul went in his political career, the people of Whitney Pier followed him. And the same with the guy who stepped in his shoes by the name of Gordy Goss. Gordy was a good friend of mine who grew up in Hunkytown. He ran the Boys and Girls Club, which is across the street from me. And he went on to be a great politician here and Speaker of the House before his death a few years ago. Another great notable is Danny Galvin. Remember Danny Galvin? The voice of Hockey Night in Canada, pier boy. Another great pier boy, Danny Galvin was. I actually have my picture taken with him with a bunch of other kids down here at the Police Village many years ago. Actually, the picture resurfaced on Facebook. I had forgotten all about it. And somebody on Facebook brought up the Cape Breton Post with our picture with Danny Galvin. Another notable, everybody knows, Frankie MacDonald, the weatherman. Yeah. Another pier boy who lives down a block. You can see Frankie every day walking through the pier. Another notable is Lisa Wright, the politician, Lisa Wright, who was a McCormick from Catherine Street down Dogpatch Way, she was in the Harper government. Isaac Phillips was a black steel worker who was the very first black man in Canada to receive the Order of Canada. And his claim to fame was just, he showed what an immigrant could do when he came to Canada, what he could be by working as a steel worker. So that's some notables there. Now there is another notable, and this little story is from the 70s, when I was a teenager. One winter's day, probably I would say around maybe this time of the year, I can't remember the exact month, where I grew up on Ferris Street, there was many kids. Oh, we had enough for 2 teams of baseball and three hockey teams, street hockey teams on the go anytime, But this particular time, we had our neighbors 2 doors up, another apartment building complex. There was 4 boys and 2 girls lived in an apartment, and very good friends of mine still to this day. And we would go on Friday nights to play poker as teenagers, like you shouldn't do, right? And so we would be up in their apartment, and when you went up to my neighbor's house, you had to go up to the 2nd floor on the outside steps. And when you went in, you entered the apartment, you were in a little hall with a landing with 4 steps up, and to the right was the kitchen, to the left was the living room, down the hall were the bedrooms and the washroom. That made up the apartment. I'll give you this little sidebar. Downstairs, the family's name was Joseph. And Mary Ellen, who was a local school teacher here at Jameson School, married one of Anne Murray's brothers and moved away. Okay, that's a little side. But anyway, on this night, we're playing cards and we had the money on the table. There might have been a beer, I can't really say. I'm not, we weren't of the age, right?
A long time ago.
But there could have been, but I think the statute of limitations has run out. So anyway, this particular night, as most families in the pier, most kids that lived in the pier, if they came to your door, they knocked and they walked right in. The doors weren't locked. Everybody was welcome. And my mother's social were welcome. Every neighbor, every kid that lived in a house, you were welcome. When you knocked on the door, you just walked in and say, hey, is Jerry home? Or is Barry home? Or is Gordy home? And you just went in, you sat, and that was it. So on this particular evening, a knock came upon the door opened, and in came this young fella, and I won't use his name, but we'll call him Roy. So anyway, Roy comes in, and Roy joins in the poker game, right? He gets his spot at the table, and he's sitting down, and we're playing the poker, and we're having a chat, and we're having our pop, and then a little while later, I can't tell you how long it was because I can't remember that, but another knock came on the door. But this time the door didn't open. So when the door doesn't open, it's a stranger. It's not somebody from the neighborhood, right? So the knock came upon the door, and I can't tell you who answered the door, but when they opened the door, to our surprise, was the police that were at the door. So the police officer stepped in to the doorway, and he said, who owns those boots? And we looked around, and come around the corner. Roy looks around. He says, they're my boots. He said, then you come with us. So later we found out that when they took Roy from the apartment and off they went with him, like Roy had lived along Victoria Road, and on his way up to the neighbor's house to play poker, when he came up Ferris Street, on the corner of Ferris Street and Victoria Road, across the street was the fire station, the original pier fire station. And on the side of that they had the cop shop was alongside of that. But if you remember back in the day, in the 60s and the 70s, all your fireboxes were on your telephone poles. Here in Sydney, they were. So Roy, in his infinite wisdom, coming up, pulled the fire alarm at the corner of Ferris Street. But what he didn't realize that Roy was walking through a fresh fallen snow. So Roy walked all the way up to the card game, came in and sat down. And when the police went to the firebox, they tracked Roy to the door. And that's my story of the footprints in the snow.
Good one.
True.
You mentioned
True story.
famous people from
And I'm not the only pier boy. I'm not the only pier boy that'll tell you that story.
Yeah.
I met Her Honor Mayan Francis. She was the Lieutenant Governor here, and in 2010, I think, the community I live in, St. Anne's Bay, was awarded the Lieutenant Governor's Award for Community Spirit, and she came to present it. And the folks at the Cabot Trail Writers Festival asked me to write something for Her Honor. So I started at it, and I started off with a poem that ended up being probably 47 verses with a sing-along chorus. And the name of it, we'll see right away who speaks any Gaelic here, was The Maiden Voyage of the Pac Mahan.
Yeah.
Well, so Stewart has some Gaelic, and you may have heard it before, but Pock in Gaelic is kiss, and
Yeah.
han is derriere, rear, backside, and mo is a first person pronoun. So kiss my noun. And I remember that Aaron Schneider was sitting beside her honor in the hall when I presented this, along with the chorus of 6 sing-along dancers in my rhyming poem. And he had to explain to the governor the meaning of Pak Mahan.
Yeah.
So there. Stuart, my boy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Beaver, thanks for explaining the phone boxes on the telephone pole, because the only way you'd know there was a fire in Englishtown when I was growing up was when you seen the smoke coming out of the house.
Yeah. I
I
believe Roy was the cause for them being removed from the polls.
Yeah. When I was growing up, a lot of people. We were at a museum. I think it was the Highland Village Museum, and they have, if you go into some of the houses, they got a crank phone. Well, I grew up with that technology, right? The young fellow was trying to explain how the crank phone worked, and he couldn't. Like, I can still tell you my phone number from when I was a kid. It was at 1 ring 12, right? And when it
12.
rang on the phone, it was 1 long, 2 short.
Yeah.
But I was trying to explain that to the guy, and one of the other tourists was looking at the box. He says, "What's that button for?" And there was a button on the side of the box, and you had to push that and crank like a bugger to get the operator. And that's, that was the tech, and that was right up until the early '80s. And then we got high tech. We got party line.
That would have been long distance to Sydney.
Though, it took me a lot less time to crank out somebody's number on the phone than it was for me to dial the number on the phone.
Yeah.
And there was no dial tone, so if you're a nosy, and I'm guilty of it. You could if you lifted the receiver up, you could listen, and I wasn't the only one. I can tell you.
Well, you start a conversation on the party line, and as the conversation went on, the volume would drop as more people picked up their phones, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Ours was 3 ring 2.
3 ring 2, yeah.
3 ring 2, yeah.
Yeah. That was, when did you stop using it, Bill?
We got a hardwired phone with an operator when I was about 14. Yeah, and you the phone and ask for the number, and mine was 606W, and then later it changed to 606J. Yeah, it was another 15 years before we got dials. Yeah.
And it's funny because Englishtown, we're just down the road from where Alexander Graham Bell was buried.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's like the shoemaker's children going barefoot, right? The last
Exactly.
the technology.
Yeah. Like I said, it was pretty neat growing up there. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned fireboxes, and it reminded me that my son lives in Toronto, and he likes his tech. He likes his great big television. You got like a 55-inch screen, and Maureen, his wife, loves Christmas. If she could, she'd put up a tree in September the 1st and then trade it for a new one the next September. She'd leave it up year round. And she starts shopping, I think, in August for Christmas. And they had just moved to this house on Cosburn. It's a fairly busy street in East York, and mounted Lauren's great big 56-inch television crosswise across the corner of the room, because it's the only place it would fit. And Maureen was getting right into Christmas, and she had that streaming of the Christmas fireplace going on the big screen, and just getting right into the spirit of things. And all of a sudden there was flashing lights outside and a banging on the door, and it was 2 policemen saying, "Are you okay in there?" They thought the house was on fire. And it's one of those situations that's really funny, but by God, you don't want to laugh. But they did, and the cops were upset when miffed, but I guess they took it in good stride anyway, because the house is still there.
You get like storms and stuff that would come in, and like I remember, it must have been it had to have been about 2 weeks at least. I'm thinking even longer, that we were without power, and you know, it was nowadays you got emergency shelters and all this, but nobody seemed to mind the fact that there's no power, right? And it's funny now, the power goes off in my community. The first thing you hear right after, it's all the generators starting up. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have another short one I got from Hector, and this was a fella he said was working on a farm in Washabuck. A good farm, nice big house, 3-story house, and they had a long driveway that came in on the east side by the fence there, and it would loop around the front of the house and then go out and join the road again at the west side. This Sunday morning, the fellow went into church, the hired man went into church, and they were looking for him to come back around lunchtime, and saw him come walking along the road from past the east drive, and he walked past the east driveway and kept going, and then he walked past the west one, and he disappeared, and he was gone for like 10 or 15 minutes, and he finally came back, and the woman said, "No, Duncan, what happened there? We saw you go past both the driveways and disappear, and now you're coming back." "Oh," he says, "I was telling myself a story and I wanted to hear the end of it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
The floor is open.
Yeah, Bill, so there's a comment, there is someone who would like to tell a story.
Oh, by all means.
All right, so I'm just going to turn, it's Art and Kathy's house. So we'll just, yeah, you're unmuted. So I think. Oh, there you go. Okay. Okay. Hi. Can we hear you? I wonder.
I can't hear you, Art.
Okay.
Art, he's still muted.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so let's see if I can fix it.
There.
Oh,
Another
good.
round.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Got it? Okay, well, we got somebody from the pier here. I'm a bay by. Your way. No, it's just a story. Back in 82, 83, Kathy and I were married, and I did a year post-grad in Toronto. And we were, after a lot of years of university, we were kind of frugal, and we're both Scottish, so we were always like to save money. But we'll go back to the Russell Theater in Glace Bay, and when everybody got their 25 cents allowance in my neighborhood, same thing, like you'd have dozens of kids, we would troop our way to the Russell Theater at the bottom of Commercial Street and go to the Saturday matinee, and it'd be bedlam. And it was a Mr. Wiener ran the theater. So now, when the projector would go haywire, which would be at least once through the show, all you'd hear in the dark was the whole theater hollering, "Wiener, Wiener, Wiener." He'd come out with a flashlight, they'd be throwing people out left, right, and center. Rumors were rats running around, screaming, hollering, popcorn and pop flying. So now let's go back ahead to 82, 83, and whatever is that in Yonge Street in Toronto. Now we like to save money, so there was an older theater, old-fashioned theater that would show 2 movies for the price of 1, but they'd been out about 6 months. So Kathy and I would go there, and it was one Friday night. We're sitting in this big theater, fair number of people, but it's dark. It used to be about the same size as the old Paramount or Vogue, that type of theater.
Yeah.
And we're watching enjoying the movie. All of a sudden, it's reel to reel. There it goes. You know, it's all haywire and everything. From somewhere in the back, I hear, "Wiener, Wiener, Wiener." I know exactly where this guy grew up. I never did get to meet them, but after I stopped crying, laughing so much, I said no. But it was so funny that year we met through the whole year, at least once a week, we would meet somebody from Glace Bay on the sidewalk,
Yeah.
somewhere in TO. So that was just another one where there's Cape Bretoners everywhere, and
Oh,
particularly
indeed
from the
there are.
hometown.
That's
Good.
That's funny.
Thanks, Art.
Thanks,
That's
Art.
great.
I'll have to ask my my friend Nancy, who lives in Jerusalem, because her last name was Wiener. I'll have to ask her if she was a relative. She grew up in the pier, but they moved away many years ago. But it could
Probably
be
related
could be-
to
could be
the
an uncle
family
there.
in the Bay.
Indeed. Now, yeah. I tell you what, Bill, if I may indulge, I'd like to play a little tune, if I can. It's a song about Whitney Pier, actually. It's a song about growing up here, and well received by many of the pier people that I grew up with, and it kind of tells you the history from back when to present day. And if you let me indulge in this little song for you, I will. And it'll give you the history of my hometown. And that's the name of the song is called "The Streets of My Hometown," and it's about growing up here in Whitney Pier. Because I've got no stories. I got stories, but may not want to tell them. It goes like this. I can recall not so long ago, I'd hear the midnight whistle blow, and I'd watch the men with lunch pail in hand down to the steel mill they'd go. They made their living then, there in that devil's den, where the searing heat turned boys into men. When their shifts would end, they'd head back home again, not knowing what tomorrow might bring. Now as I walk along the streets of my hometown, I no longer see the men I used to see around. It seems they've left the island since the mill shut down. It's a lonely place now, the streets of my hometown. In the coffee shops they sit, they talk about the pit and the days when coal was king. In the darkness of the mines, of friends they left behind, they sit not knowing what tomorrow might bring. Now as I walk along the streets of my hometown, I no longer see the men I used to see around. It seems they've left the island since the mine shut down. It's a lonely place now, the streets of my hometown. To the colleges they go, they sit in desks row on row, plan their future and their dreams, not wanting to be misled by the words their teachers said. They sit not knowing what tomorrow might bring. Now as I walk along the streets of my hometown, I no longer see the kids I used to see around. It seems they've left the island, there's no work to be found. It's a lonely place now, the streets of my hometown. And as I walk along the streets of my hometown, I no longer see the friends I used to see around. It seems they've left the island, for the west they are bound. It's a lonely place now, the streets of my hometown. That's a little tune about the Great Whitney Pier.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lee.
Yeah.
Like that.
It's the pier is a great place. It's a great place to be. It's a great place. I love it here. I'll never leave. They'll be putting me down at the bottom of Fair Street along the Steel Company Road, where the ashes of some of my good friends, the guys like Gordy Goss and Terry Hennessy and Glenn Conway. That's where I'll be down there with them guys. I'll never leave the pier. It's a great place.
I wish I could live back home. Mine are domestic, or my wife is a stout-hearted Digby girl, so I don't know if I'll be able to talk her into moving to Cape Breton or not. But Bill, do you remember?
She
Do you
followed
remember
you to Germany, so fair is fair, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Do you remember when we were doing the project? There was one day we had a young lady from Mexico, and then there was another young chap showed up. He was from Montreal, and they were singing. We had Gaelic songs going, we had English songs going, we had Mexican folk songs. We had a young fellow from Montreal. He had one of those weird drums, metal drums or whatever. We had all that. Was one day that. Yeah.
I have a curiosity question. Was your grandfather Neil Roddy?
I don't know what the R. All I ever heard was his name was Neil R. I don't know what the R stood for. I don't even think he knew himself. Yeah.
Well, I have a little truck.
What's the odds, eh?
Go.
There's the way the names work down there. They were descriptors of people, right? It's probably not just unique to that area, but there was a number of Sadies that grew up or that were in our area. My grandmother was a Sadie, so they call her Sadie Neelar. And Tommy Peggy, that's Buddy McDonald's father. He was known as Tommy Peggy. There were some names that, but that's the Neil R. I don't know. Like, I've asked my dad several times what the R stood for. He doesn't think it ever stood for anything other than an initial. Yeah.
I have a trucking story from my time on the highway. Neil, Lee, you spent some time driving years ago, eh?
Yes, I did, yeah.
And the transition from driving a four-wheeler to a big truck takes some getting used to. Size, of course, is the big thing. Your four-wheeler might be 4 or maybe 5 meters long, and the big truck is 22. Everything's bigger. It's taller, it's wider, it's heavier. It takes a lot longer to get up to speed, and it takes a whole lot longer to stop. And you need quite a bit more room to turn corners. But everybody who drives get used to that, But the hardest thing for most drivers is backing up. If you want to back up your four-wheeler, you want the back end to go to the left, you turn the wheel to the left. It's that easy. In a big truck, if you want the trailer to go to the left, you turn the wheel of the tractor to the right, that's the back of the tractor to the right and the trailer to the left. And the whole thing hinges on a 3.5-inch steel pin called the kingpin. And you learn to make very fine adjustments. If you don't make fine adjustments, then before you know it, you're looking out the left window at the back of your trailer at 90 degrees. In the start of my trucking time, I was running reefer up and down the West Coast from BC through California and the Western 7 states. And I was at Cal Sale Cooler in Oxnard, California. And a cooler, what we call a cooler in trucking, was about a 200,000 square foot refrigerated warehouse. and all they sold was celery by the truckload. And they had 13, I think they had 13 docks, and the docks were over yonder. And when you were waiting for your appointment, you were lined up facing the docks. And I'm waiting for my appointment. This big old long-nosed Peterbilt comes in front of the docks, extended hood, pewter colored, beautiful truck. And behind it's a shiny 53-foot 3-axle reefer with chicken lights all over it. And it looked like the whole thing was hand polished, you know. And I watched him go by, and he went around and made a big clockwise circle and backed into the lineup. And I thought, when I grow up, I want to be able to do that. And your pickups were by appointment, and his was called before mine. So I thought, I'm going to watch him, and maybe I can, you know, improve my game here a little bit. So he pulled out and opened the doors, came around and lined up on the dock that he was assigned. I should say that Calcell was built probably in the early 50s. And at that time, there was no real long haul produce trucking. The farthest they would go would be from California to Washington or out in the Midwest. And so there were no reefers. They were ordinary box trailers. If you needed refrigeration, they would blow in what they call top ice, shaved ice on the top of the load, and that would keep it cool for a day or two. And they were 96-inch trailers, and the 13 docks would be a couple of feet between them. So if you had your doors open, you'd still have probably 16 inches of room to back in on either side, and that's lots of room. But then the range increased, and it went from local to regional to right cross country. And many times I would pick up in California and go to the market in Toronto or Montreal or New York. And so they developed diesel refrigeration units on front of the trailers, and the trailers went from 96 inches to 102. So the 16 inches that you had, now you had 10, right? It's getting a little narrower. And there was so much insulation on the back doors, probably 4 or 5 inches on each door. So if the trucks on either side were in position, you had maybe 2 inches on either side to back a 53-foot trailer in, and that's a bit snug. Anyway, this guy in the Pete, he pulls out, he lines up, and he starts backing in, and he didn't quite make it. So he pulled out, straightened out again, try it over again, and again, and again. And I counted 11 times he lined up on that dock, and he just could not find it. And finally he pulled out and he just put his head down on the wheel and you could feel the despair. And he got out of the seat. His partner came out of the bunk and she put it in, I think, on the second try. But the lesson for me there in trucking and in everything else in my life, it doesn't matter how good you are or how good your machinery is, you're going to have a bad day once in a while.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there. Who's up? Stewart, you just sat up. Isn't that clever?
I sat up. Okay.
All right.
Oh, well, I don't know, I'll give a school story. For the first couple of years, they used to send us kids from Englishtown to Bulledry to school. So for me, it'd be grade primary to grade 2 that we went. Anybody, I think it was above grade 8, would go to Bedeck. And after a couple of years, I guess they decided to send us all to Bedeck. But I can remember this one time, because everybody in Englishtown at that time was a cousin. Like, we're all related in a pretty thick family. Anyway, so me and one of my cousins, Larry, we had a squabble on the bus coming home one time, and we were writing bad words. And you know how the window steam up. So we were writing bad words back and forth to each other. And, anyway, the next day at school, the teacher kind of took us into the next classroom, and my name and Larry's name got called, and the principal and the bus driver came in, and we were told to say what it was we were writing on the window. Now, don't panic, Tara. I'm not going to say the word. So you can just imagine how remorseful I was. I was in tears, and Larry started crying, and I wasn't going to say what I wrote on the window, and finally she forced us to fess up, and so finally I said, I wrote bleep off, right? And Larry, as quick as a snap, he looked at me, he went, "No, you didn't." He said, "You wrote bug off." Yeah, so not only did I get in trouble for writing it, I got in trouble for misspelling it.
Yeah.
Well, that's a rarity. That's one I haven't heard before.
Yeah, well, that's the truth.
Yeah, that'd be Larry McCaskill, would it?
Yeah, Larry McCaskill, yeah. I think he lives in Antigonish now with his wife.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's English town, it's Christy, McDonald, or McCaskill. You pretty well got it covered, eh?
Yeah, pretty well. Actually, I don't think there's that many McDonalds. We were the only McDonald family. That's only because Dad came from down Skirdu, so. Yeah.
I see Ronald has joined us. Hi, Ronald. Nice to see you again. Lee, you got any other to send it away with?
Not really.
Okay. Well,
No, not really. Not really.
Come on, you must have wrote in the window once.
Well, you know what? I drove bus for 20 years. I drove the pier bus for a long time, and where the radar base is at up there, when they switched over from the military to regular housing, when I first became a bus driver, I learned very quickly that everybody that lived in the radar base got out at their driveway. There was actually 3 stops to stop, but you never stopped at the 3 stops. When somebody told you, "This is my house," that's where you stopped. And the pier bus was late a few times getting back downtown. And there was a guy, I'm trying to think of his name, Skipper, a guy by the name of Skipper, who lived up at the radar base. And Skipper was a great guy, but he didn't work too much. But when he would want to go to town on a Friday night to go get a coffee at the Tim Hortons, which was in the Zellers Mall at the time, before they built the Tim Hortons here in the pier, Skippy would come to the bus. And as I said, I was a new bus driver. I didn't know. I was told by a very learned bus driver of 40 years, a guy from Glace Bay by the name of Stuart Mcdonald. Gerard would say to me, "Now, Beaver," he said, when people get on the bus," he says, "a lot of people don't have a lot of money. So what you should be doing is you look out the window, the driver's window, and when you hear that can go clink, 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 you close the doors and you go on. You never look and see what's going in the can." But Skipper would get on at the radar base, and he would say to me on a Friday night, or anytime he got on when I drove the bus there, he would say, "Am I all right?" And I would say, "Yeah, Skipper, you're all right." So then he would go and he wouldn't put no money in the can. And he'd go back and he'd sit down, and he would get out at the Zellers right in front. We used to win the mall in those days, and he would get out right in front of Tim Hortons there, and he'd go have his coffee. Now, the bus used to only run till 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock was the last trip going to the pier. And it didn't go to, actually 10 o'clock was the last trip, but you didn't go to the radar base. What you did at the 10 o'clock run, whoever was on the bus, you took them home, wherever they lived, it didn't matter. So anyway, at 9 o'clock, Skippy would come to the bus store, and he would look at me and he would say, "Am I all right?" And I would say, "Sure you are, Skip, you're all right." So he'd get right on the bus, and he'd go, and he'd sit down, and he'd get out when we made the final trip up to the base. And the reason for that was, like I said, Skip didn't have money at the time. He was waiting for the end of the month for his check. So his "Am I all right?" was, "Can I get on the bus and not pay?" So, and I always said yes. So then at the end of the month, he would come to me and he would say, "Now, Beaver, how much do I owe you for the trips I made over the month?" And him not having much money, I used to say, "Put $2 in the can, Skip, and we're good for another month." So that's a little bus driving story.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, indeed.
I like these humans.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
There was,
Good story.
truth. Truth
there
be
was a
told.
fella, there was a fella, I'm not sure whereabouts he lived. It was down north of Smoky, I'm sure. His name was Skipper. They used to call him Skipper. And it's probably not the same fella, but he used to walk. He used to walk from like down north of Smoky, and I like used to see him passing in front of our house all the time. Bill, I mean, if you talk to some people down there, they'll probably tell you. I think his last name was McDonald, but he'd walk. I'm sure he's walking to town. Might hitchhike when he got up to the highway or whatever.
Was
But,
he a very
he used to
tall
do-
man?
I can remember him being
Because
scraggly and
that-
stuff. Don't ever.
That's where
I'm
Skipper
6'2".
was from.
Everybody's shorter than me.
That's where Skipper was from.
We're down north.
Yep, that's where he was
Yeah,
from.
well, that was probably the same fella.
Yeah,
Yeah, and he used to walk. He used to walk quite a ways. That was probably the same guy. Yeah.
and he had that accent.
Yeah.
What accent is that?
That north, down north accent. Skippy had that. Yeah. Real gentleman. Yeah.
Good. Well, friends and neighbors, that's been a lovely evening. I've had a wonderful time here. I want to thank Cape Breton Library for having the Storyteller in-Residence program, even though, much to my chagrin, there was no residence involved in the position. It's just a title. I thought I'd get to live in a nice house, you know. But not so. And Tara is the program coordinator. Thanks for doing what you do here.
Oh,
And
no
my
problem.
guests, Lee Stewart, the Beaver, and Stuart McLean. McLean? Who are you this week? McDonald. Jesus, bear with me.
You don't mind being called Stuart McLean, though.
Well, no, well,
He's a decent fella. He was a decent fella.
yes, it was indeed.
Yeah.
I will finish off here. As you go through life, you'll meet people that spout poetry and some that never speak a word of it, but almost everybody you'll ever meet will know at least part of this story. And it was written in 1822 by a fellow named Clement Clark Moore. And if you know part of this and you'd like to join in with it, you are welcome to do that. Oops, I shut myself off. I look better there for a moment. But you can maybe guess what it's going to be. Here we are. It was the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not one creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced through their heads, and Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew in a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster like midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With the little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet and Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen, at the top of the porch to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky, so to the rooftop his coursers they flew, with a bag full of toys, a sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. Then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof, As I pulled in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in furs from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had slung on his back, and he looked like a peddler opening his sack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His mouth was drawn up in a dull little bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke encircled his head like a wreath. He had a round face, a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly wee elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, filled all the stockings and turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. And I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas
Happy
to all."
Christmas
To
to
all.
all.
To all.
All a good night.
Good night.
Good night, one and all, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, everybody.
Alec, I guess playing about.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, say it again, Stewart.
Alec Creel.
Nolly
There it
Creel, I guess a bit about the yes, there it is, Gaelic for you.
Yeah.
You should go take an Irish.
Uh, that was fun.
Yeah,
Job well done, everyone. Yeah, it was a great session.
How do you say hello to Dale for me?
I will, Lee. I will. That's right. Yeah, I'll tell her I heard some great stories from the pier. Will do. Yeah.